ladies and gentlemen. Today I want to talk about something powerful, something we rarely talk about but desperately need to master: the power of not reacting. In a world that constantly expects a response, whether it's in the form of an email, a comment, or a confrontation, we are often conditioned to feel as though we must react quickly. But what if I told you that the greatest strength you can show in those moments is not reacting at all? What if the most powerful choice we can make is to cut off the chaos silently, quietly, and without fanfare? Let's pause for a moment to understand the difference between reacting and responding. A reaction is often instinctive, driven by emotions that we don't always understand. It's that gut reaction that rises up in anger or hurt before we even have time to think. And when we react, we are often pulled deeper into the very thing we wish to escape. But a response that's different. A response is thoughtful. It comes from a place of awareness and choice. A response says, I am in control here, not my emotions, not the situation, but me. Now, let me ask you this: how often do you find yourself regretting your reactions? That sharp word you said in anger, that comment you fired off in frustration, we've all been there. And what we don't realize in those moments is that reacting comes at a great emotional cost. It drains us, it makes us feel scattered, off-center, and disconnected. It keeps us locked in a cycle of stress and conflict that we don't need. But why do we react? Why do we let our emotions control us in those moments? It's because we are triggered. Triggers are deeply ingrained responses, often rooted in past hurts or insecurities. When something or someone presses that button, the reaction is almost automatic. But here's the good news: we have the power to break that cycle. We have the ability to pause, to recognize the trigger, and to choose not to respond in the same old way. And that's where silence comes in. Silence is not weakness. Silence is strength. In that moment of silence, we create space. Space to reflect. Space to breathe. Space to decide how we want to show up. Think about it: when you don't react, when you cut off the noise and refuse to engage in the drama, you hold the power. But let me be clear, cutting them off doesn't mean cutting off the relationship. It means cutting off the toxicity, cutting off the patterns that no longer serve you. You are not avoiding, you are preserving your peace. It's not about building walls, it's about creating healthy boundaries. And boundaries, my friends, are one of the most powerful tools we have for emotional well-being. Emotional intelligence is the key to this kind of self-mastery. When we become aware of our emotions, we no longer need to be controlled by them. We can choose how to respond, when to speak, and when to stay silent. We can learn to read the room, read ourselves, and act with intention. And when we do, we hold the reins of our own lives, instead of letting our circumstances dictate our reactions. So let me leave you with this: imagine a life where you no longer feel the need to react to every comment, every challenge, every slight. Imagine a life where you can sit in your peace, unshaken by the chaos around you. A life where your response is a reflection of your strength, not a reaction to your fears. This is the life you deserve. A life where you choose silence when necessary, response when wise, and peace above all. Don't react. Cut them off silently, powerfully, and with grace. In a world that demands constant engagement, where every message, every email, and every moment feels like an invitation to react, it's easy to forget that we have the power to choose. We often find ourselves pulled into a cycle of rapid responses, fueled by emotions that come rushing in before we have time to think. But what if, in those moments, we didn't react at all? What if we paused, took a breath, and allowed ourselves to simply be present? It's so tempting to think that we need to have an answer immediately, to defend ourselves, to prove a point, or to show that we've got it all figured out. The world wants quick replies, fast decisions, and immediate reactions. And more often than not, we comply. But the truth is, the real power lies not in reacting instantly, but in choosing how we respond. Reactions are automatic. They come from deep within us, often driven by emotion, past experiences, or fear. A quick response to a situation might feel like the right thing in the moment, but it's also where we are most vulnerable to making choices that don't align with who we truly want to be. How many times have we said something we regretted or acted in a way that we later wished we hadn't? Now, imagine for a moment that you have the ability to stop that chain of events in its tracks. What would it look like to be able to feel those emotions rise and choose instead of reacting, to respond with calm, intention, and clarity? To step back for just a moment, breathe, and allow space to decide how you want to engage with the world around you. That pause, that stillness, is not just an absence of reaction, it is a powerful presence of self-control. It is where your true strength lies, in being able to decide how you show up, rather than being swept away by the momentum of what is happening around you. Choosing to respond thoughtfully instead of reacting impulsively allows us to reclaim control over our emotions, our relationships, and our lives. It's not about suppressing our feelings or pretending to be unaffected. It's about understanding that we have the power to choose our actions and the direction of our energy. When we stop reacting and begin responding, we open ourselves to a new way of being. It's a way that doesn't just serve us, but also those around us. It's a way that encourages deep connection, clear communication, and emotional freedom. So, when you feel the heat of a situation rising, when your heart begins to race and your mind starts to spin, remember this: you don't have to react. You have a choice. And that choice, my friends, is where your true strength lies. It's in the pause. It's in the silence. It's in the power of response over reaction. Think about a moment when you were caught off guard, when something unexpected happened, and your first instinct was to react. Maybe it was a harsh comment, an unfair situation, or an emotional trigger. In that instant, something inside you bubbled up an impulse to defend, to retaliate, or to justify yourself. Reactions are often automatic, fueled by raw emotion, and they arise before we have a chance to fully process what's happening. They come from a place deep within, from our instincts, from past experiences, from the stories we've told ourselves. They are quick, they are intense, and sometimes they don't serve us. But there is another way. A response, unlike a reaction, is born from a place of intention, clarity, and awareness. It's the pause between the trigger and the action. It's the space where we choose not to let the emotions dictate our behavior, but to instead ground ourselves in what's most important: our values, our integrity, and our long-term well-being. And a reaction happens in the blink of an eye, often without thought, while a response is a conscious decision, one that comes from a place of self-awareness and emotional intelligence. Consider this: when we react, we are often controlled by our emotions. Our reactions come from a place of defensiveness, fear, or insecurity. We are fighting to protect something, to prove something, or to avoid feeling hurt. But in those moments, what we don't realize is that reacting often causes more harm than good. It can escalate conflicts, deepen misunderstandings, and hurt relationships. It's a knee-jerk response that leaves us feeling drained, scattered, and disconnected. On the other hand, a response gives us the power to choose how we engage. When we respond, we create space between the situation and our behavior. We acknowledge our emotions without letting them define our actions. We take a breath, reflect, and then decide how to proceed. In that moment of awareness, we recognize that our response is a reflection of who we are, not a reaction to what's happening around us. It's a choice rooted in our core beliefs, a conscious decision to show up as our best selves. This is where the power lies, in the moment of choice. When we react, we are often driven by fear or habit, but when we respond, we are guided by wisdom, self-control, and a deeper understanding of our values. We realize that we are not at the mercy of our emotions or the circumstances. We can choose to rise above, to engage with the situation in a way that reflects our strength and integrity. Learning the difference between reaction and response is a game changer. It gives us control over our emotional landscape. It means that instead of being swept away by the currents of our feelings, we can choose to steer the ship in the direction that aligns with our true self. It's not about suppressing our emotions or pretending they don't exist. It's about recognizing them, understanding them, and then making a choice that serves us and the people around us in the most positive way. This is the journey from reacting to responding, a shift from being controlled by our emotions to taking responsibility for how we show up in the world. And when we choose response over reaction, we become more aligned with our authentic selves, more connected with others, and more at peace with the world around us. We've all been there, that moment when something happens, and before we even have time to fully process it, we react. Maybe it's an angry response to a criticism, a defensive remark in a conversation, or a sharp retort in the heat of a disagreement. In that instant, it feels like we've won some kind of battle, like we've protected ourselves or stood up for what's right. But have you ever stopped to consider the emotional cost of those reactions? The toll they take, not just in the moment, but long after the words are spoken or the actions are taken? Reactions often come from a place of fear, insecurity, or vulnerability. When we feel attacked, misunderstood, or judged, we instinctively go into defense mode. We react to protect ourselves, to shield our ego, to guard against the discomfort of being hurt. And while that immediate response might feel necessary, it comes at a cost that's often invisible in the moment. It's like a debt we don't see, an emotional withdrawal that we'll have to repay later. Every time we react, especially out of anger or fear, we drain ourselves. We burn up our energy on emotions that don't serve us, and sometimes even when the situation passes, that energy doesn't come back. Our hearts race, our minds swirl, and we end up emotionally exhausted. The temporary relief we get from lashing out, justifying ourselves, or defending our position doesn't last. It leaves us feeling depleted, unsettled, and often regretful. We've given away part of ourselves in a moment of impulse, and now we must carry the weight of that. Think about it: when we react impulsively, we rarely feel better afterward. If anything, we feel worse. The conflict escalates, the relationships suffer, and the negativity lingers. There's this internal knot, this underlying discomfort that comes from knowing we didn't act in alignment with who we truly want to be. We're left with emotional clutter, a mental fog that clouds our clarity and peace. And over time, this emotional debt accumulates. The more we react without thinking, the more it chips away at our emotional well-being, leaving us feeling anxious, disconnected, and drained. The emotional cost of reacting goes beyond just the moment itself. It affects the way we show up in our lives, the way we connect with others, and the way we feel about ourselves. When we constantly react, we create patterns of stress, conflict, and turmoil. It's like living in a constant state of emotional volatility, riding the waves of every situation, letting the storms of life dictate our course. But it doesn't have to be this way. Every time we choose to react, we hand over our peace, our power, and our sense of control. But every time we choose to respond thoughtfully, calmly, intentionally, we take that power back. When we step out of reaction mode and choose to pause, to breathe, to reflect, we give ourselves the space to process the situation without letting it control us. That space is where our emotional freedom lies. It's where we can release the burden of reacting and instead carry ourselves. We often think of our reactions as something we control, as if we have complete power over every impulse and response. But in truth, so much of what drives our reactions comes from deep within, from the places we don't always see or understand. These are the triggers, the things that set us off, the hidden buttons others can unknowingly press that make us act without thinking. And while it's easy to blame someone else for triggering us, the real power lies in understanding why we react in the first place. We all have them, those moments when something is said or done, and we feel the heat rise in our chest, or our hearts race, or our fists clench. Before we even realize what's happening, we're in fight or flight mode, trying to defend ourselves, trying to protect something deep inside us. This is not just an overreaction or a matter of being too sensitive, it's our instincts kicking in. Our body is responding to something we've experienced before, something that reminds us of past pain, past fear, or past wounds. We're not just reacting to the current situation, we're reacting to the echo of something that lives inside us, something unhealed, unresolved, or misunderstood. triggers are often rooted in our past, in our history, and in the way we've learned to navigate the world. If we've been hurt in a certain way before, or if we felt abandoned or rejected, even a small, seemingly insignificant comment or action can bring all those feelings rushing back. It's like walking down a path you've already traveled, only you don't know the rocks and potholes that are ahead of you. When we get triggered, we don't just respond to the present, we're responding to all the old emotions, memories, and fears we've carried with us. And instinct is that deep, primal part of us that doesn't think. It just acts. It's there to protect us, to keep us safe. When something feels like a threat, our instinct kicks in to fight, flee, or freeze. But here's the catch sometimes. Our instincts don't know the difference between real danger and perceived danger. Sometimes our body is reacting as though we're facing a life or death situation, even when what's happening around us doesn't warrant that kind of response. It's as if our instincts are stuck on autopilot, constantly scanning the environment for potential threats, real or imagined, and when that happens, we react. The problem with this is that too often our reactions are not grounded in the present moment. They're grounded in something old, a past hurt, a past trauma, a past story we've told ourselves. And because those reactions come from a place of deep instinctual fear, we rarely have the clarity to see them for what they are. We feel hurt, we feel angry, and we feel out of control, but it's not just because of what's happening now. It's because something deep inside us has been awakened, and we've responded without thinking. But here's the liberating truth: when we understand why we react, we can begin to take the power back. When we learn to recognize our triggers, those old emotional buttons, we stop being slaves to them. We can't control when a trigger happens, but we can control how we respond to it. Awareness is the first step. Awareness helps us see that our reactions are often not about the other person, but about something inside us that needs healing. And once we understand that, we can start to choose differently. We can begin to create space between the trigger and our response. We can pause, we can breathe, we can choose not to let our past dictate our present. It takes time, it takes patience, and it takes compassion. But the more we understand our triggers and instincts, the more empowered we become to respond with clarity and wisdom. Instead of being swept away by the current of old emotions, we can stand firm in the present, knowing that we have the ability to choose our response, and in doing so, we begin to heal, to grow, and to step into a life of freedom. We've all experienced those moments when something happens, and before we can even fully comprehend what's going on, we react. It's almost as if we don't have control, like we're on autopilot, caught in a rush of emotion that comes over us before we have a chance to think. Sometimes the reaction is so intense that it takes us by surprise, an outburst, a defensiveness, an anger that flares up for no apparent reason, and we wonder, where did that come from? Why did we respond like that? The truth is, many of our reactions aren't just about what's happening in the present moment. They are triggered by things that lie deep within us, things we might not even be aware of. These are our emotional triggers, the hidden wires that, when touched, ignite a response before we even have time to think. Our triggers are like secret pathways that connect our present to our past, and when they are activated, they bring all of our old, unresolved emotions to the surface. Think about it. We all have moments in life when we felt hurt, rejected, or misunderstood. These experiences, whether big or small, don't just disappear. They become part of our emotional landscape, shaping the way we see the world and the way we interact with others. And when something happens that reminds us of those past wounds, a certain tone of voice, a particular word, a behavior, it's like a button is pressed and all those old feelings come rushing back. It's as if the past is standing right in front of us, and instead of responding to the present situation, we are reacting to the past. Our reactions often come from our deepest instincts, the primal part of us that's designed to protect us, to keep us safe. Instincts are automatic. They don't require thought or reasoning, they simply act. This is why in times of stress or conflict, we might feel like we're in fight or flight mode. We want to defend ourselves, to flee, or to shut down completely. These instincts are there for our survival, and in many ways they've served us well over the course of human history. But here's the catch: our instincts are not always aligned with what's actually happening in the moment. They don't always discern between real threats and perceived threats. So when we feel triggered, our instincts react as though we're facing a life or death situation, even if the situation is not that severe. Think about how many times we've had that knee-jerk response or reaction that feels as though it's coming from deep inside us, from a place that isn't fully conscious. We snap back, we defend, we argue, or we withdraw, all because our instincts are telling us to protect ourselves. And yet, in doing so, we often make the situation worse, deepen the conflict, or cause harm to ourselves and others. In those moments, we aren't really reacting to the person or the situation in front of us. We're reacting to something inside of us, something unresolved, something that feels unsafe, something that's been triggered from our past. This is where the power lies. When we begin to understand that our reactions are often not about the present moment, but about something deep within us, we can start to take back control. Instead of being caught off guard by our own emotions, we can start to recognize the patterns and triggers that drive us. We can learn to pause, to take a step back, and to examine what's really happening both inside us and outside of us. When we do this, we begin to see that our reactions don't have to control us. We can choose a different path. We can stop and ask ourselves, why am I reacting this way? What is this really about? Is this about what's happening now, or is it about something from my past that's coming up again? This kind of awareness gives us the freedom to respond with intention rather than reacting out of instinct or old pain. It takes time, it takes self-reflection, and it takes compassion. But every time we can pause, reflect, and choose our response, we break the cycle of automatic reactions. We step into a new way of being, one where we are no longer ruled by old wounds, but where we can show up as our true present selves. The more we understand why we react the way we do, the more we can heal those past hurts and rewrite our emotional responses. This is where we find true empowerment, not in the absence of emotion, but in the ability to choose how we respond to it. There's an incredible power in silence that most of us overlook in the rush of daily life. In a world that is constantly pushing us to speak up, to have an opinion, to assert ourselves, silence can seem like a weakness and absence of action. But what if I told you that in the quiet moments, in the spaces between words, there is an untapped strength, a power that speaks volumes without saying a single thing? Think about the last time you chose silence instead of reacting. Maybe you were in a heated conversation, or someone said something that triggered an old wound. The impulse to respond, to defend, to prove your point was strong, but you held back. You chose not to engage in the noise. That choice was not about weakness. It was an act of incredible strength. It takes courage to remain silent in a world that pressures us to react, to fill every pause with noise, to respond quickly without giving ourselves the chance to reflect. But in that silence, there is space to think, space to breathe, space to be. Silence does not mean passivity. It is not about shutting down or withdrawing. It's about consciously choosing not to let the noise of the world dictate our reactions. It's about creating room for clarity, for introspection, and for emotional control. When we choose silence, we allow ourselves the time and space to truly process what is happening. We can feel our emotions rise, but instead of letting them control us, we observe them. In that pause, we can ask ourselves, what is this really about? What am I really feeling? What is the most thoughtful way to respond, if I choose to respond at all? This is the strength of silence. It is the strength to hold space for our emotions without being swept away by them. It is the strength to remain calm in the midst of chaos, to stand firm in our own peace while the world around us may be spinning. Silence is not a sign of defeat. It is a powerful assertion of our ability to remain centered no matter what's happening around us. When we choose silence, we break free from the reflexive patterns of reaction that often lead us to say things we don't mean, to escalate conflict, or to create further misunderstanding. Silence offers us the opportunity to step out of the emotional turmoil and into the wisdom of our true selves. In that moment of stillness, we connect with something deeper than the immediate situation. We connect with our values, our integrity, and our ability to make decisions from a place of grounded clarity. It is also in silence that we find true strength in our relationships. Often in conversations, we think that we need to fill every silence with words, that we must always have something to say. But sometimes what people need most is not more words, but space to feel heard, space to be understood, space to reflect. When we allow silence to take its place in a conversation, we invite a deeper kind of connection, one that doesn't rely on verbal sparring or rushing to fill every pause. It's in the quiet moments that we truly listen, not just to the words, but to the underlying emotions and the unspoken needs. In silence, there is also the strength to be true to ourselves. In a world that is constantly trying to shape our thoughts, our opinions, our actions, it's easy to lose sight of who we are. But silence offers us a refuge from all the external noise, a space where we can reconnect with our inner truth. It's in those moments of quiet reflection that we find our clarity, our purpose, and our direction. We don't need to react to everything around us. We don't need to prove anything. In silence, we can simply be. And there is immense strength in simply being. We are so conditioned to think that silence is awkward or uncomfortable, that we must always be doing, always be speaking, always be engaged. But the truth is, silence is one of the most powerful tools. So as we move through life, let us remember the incredible power of silence, not as an absence, but as a presence, a force that can shape our reactions, our relationships, and our connection to our own truth. In those moments when we are tempted to react, to fill the space with words or noise, let us pause and embrace the strength that lies in stillness. Let silence be the space where we gather our thoughts, where we honor our emotions, and where we find clarity in the midst of chaos. Because in silence, we do not lose our voice, we find it. And when we choose to act from this place of centered calm, we step into a deeper, more powerful version of ourselves. Silence is not our weakness, it is our greatest strength.